Okay. So in the animal kingdom, most of the time, this autonomic nervous system response is only going to happen if there's a real danger. Okay. So like a zebra sees this guy, and what does it do? It goes into sympathetic. If it survives and it gets away from the lion, it doesn't stay in sympathetic. You know what it does? It goes down to the river and it drops into parasympathetic, and it recovers and it renews itself. As humans, we sometimes, or not sometimes, a lot of times, we override what the environment's showing us. And because of our frontal lobe, we can think about the past and we can think about the future more so than an animal can. And so many times we activate our autonomic nervous system, not because there's a real lion present, but because we're creating a lion in our mind that is making our system go faster and creating the same response in the body. Okay. So I want you to think for a second, what are some lions that you create in your mind? What are some lions? Is it this? Hopefully, it's not this particular class.
It's definitely the project. It's definitely a project in my class.
Exactly. That is it. Maybe it's a particular project, right? What are lions? Maybe it's something that doesn't even have to do with schoolwork. You know, maybe it's in a relationship, or maybe it's something with a family member, or maybe it's a lion of the future. You know, it's said many times it's not stress that kills us, but it's worrying about stress that kills us, or what's called anticipatory stress. Worrying about what's tomorrow going to be, when all we can be really responsible for is today, right? But we make that a lion, and we worry about the future, and one thing after another, 10, 20, 30 years out, and that creates a lion for us. Or maybe it's something in the past. You know, our unresolved past is still our present. Maybe we're carrying lions with us into class that come from something else in our life, right? And that pushes us into sympathetic and creates this cascade of responses in our body and our nervous system that can be very counterproductive to our health. You see, our body wasn't made to stay up in this sympathetic state. It was made to be in a state of homeostasis or balance. And it needs to balance out for every stressor. It needs to have an equal reaction of recovery. Unfortunately, most of the time when most of us get stressed, what's the first thing that goes? Is sleep. And that creates more problems for us. I'll finish with this, and then we're going to go into a live demonstration. I want you to think medically. I'm going to give you some different things that happen. Actually, we're going to address two things. Two things that happen medically, or some things that happen medically when the nervous system gets stuck in sympathetic or in this fast state all the time. One of the first things is that if I'm demanding all this sugar all the time, but I really don't need it because I'm not running from the lion, I'm just sitting at my computer, okay? Or I'm laying in bed at night and I'm demanding all this sugar, what's going to happen is my dietary intake is going to be primarily defined by carbohydrate, and the storage of that sugar is going to start to happen right around the adrenal glands. And if you see, you know, sometimes you see people that have this belly here and every other part of the body is fine, but they're collecting it right here. And this happens because of an overactive nervous system that's demanding a lot of sugar, but it's not running away from the lion. It's just storing it up. Number one cause of obesity in our culture is an overactivated nervous system. The second thing that happens when the nervous system, or these are major issues, is if I keep making a high demand for sugar, eventually the body can't regulate that with the insulin levels. And what do you think is the disease that's going to happen in somebody if they do this for decade after decade of going too fast and demanding all this sugar from the body, and the body can't keep up with it? I hope somebody in the classroom said type 2 diabetes. okay? The number one cause of the type 2 diabetes is this overactive nervous system. It's estimated that in 20 to 30 years, that the growth of type 2 diabetes in our culture will bankrupt the American medical system. We can't keep up with the number of people that are getting diagnosed with type 2 diabetes in our culture. The third thing that happens is cardiovascular disease. That's a no-brainer. That makes sense. If I'm making the heart burn so hard when it doesn't need to, that creates problems. And then the fourth thing is dementia, is that fourth of what's referred to as metabolic syndrome that comes from this overactive nervous system. Let's finish this discussion before the illustration with, well, what about medicines, doc? You know, how does that all work? Well, first I want you to think about different things that we experience that are negative for us typically come from, not typically, they always come from something being out of balance on the autonomic nervous system. So let me throw out a couple things for you. Somebody who's really, really anxious and maybe having panic or test-taking anxiety, really anxious, what do you think their autonomic nervous system is doing? Is it going too slow, or is it going really, really fast? I hope you guys said it was going fast, okay, which would be a sympathetic response, right? Let's think of something like somebody who can't sleep at night. Is that a slow response, or is it a fast response? That's a sympathetic response. Let's think of somebody who's depressed and they don't have the energy to kind of approach each day, or they have adrenal fatigue or chronic fatigue syndrome. What's going on in their autonomic nervous system? Hopefully you said slow. You can start to go through almost everything. High blood pressure, fast. Allergies, fast. Low blood pressure, okay? You can go up and down, and you can find all these different things. Migraines, too fast, the system wants to shut down. Everything comes from this thing being out of balance. Now, the thing about our current culture is we're really good at chemically altering the system, okay? I'm not opposed to medicine, but I want us to be able to look at, well, what's causing this stuff, and not just let's put a pill in every time to move back and forth, okay? Medicine is good, but if we're not addressing the underlying issues, we can create more problems over time. But think about how medicine works. If somebody's super anxious, they're up in sympathetic, and they take Xanax, which is something that would kind of calm down your anxiety. What do you think that does to your autonomic nervous system? It slows you down, and you don't feel as anxious. Somebody can't sleep at night, and they take an Ambien, that slows them down. Somebody's having a hard time focusing, and they take Ritalin, Adderall, Concerta, that speeds them up. But the concern about that sometimes is it speeds them up too much, and now they can't sleep at night. So now they need, and so we get this back and forth, and we haven't addressed the underlying issue, which we want to talk about in a couple minutes here. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We really haven't had any major advancements in these psychotropic medicines that move the autonomic nervous system since really the late 80s. There's a lot of new medicines on the market, but they're pretty much just been retooled, new named, new commercials. They basically are moving the system up and down. And you want to be careful that you're not just addressing it that way, but you're also trying to figure out, how can I make this stronger outside of just chemically moving that? There's two ways the autonomic nervous system can be moved. One is called a ligand-gated change, and a ligand-gated change happens when chemically you alter the system, so the nervous system, the brain runs slower or faster based on a chemical that has a short half-life, and so it will go out of the system, then you need to take it again to try to put it back in balance. And then there's called a voltage-gated change. And a voltage-gated change is when the brain actually learns to do something different, and it can maintain that on its own. It regulates its own homeostasis. And learning, or a learn response, or a voltage-gated response, is much more powerful over time. It's the greatest thing that the brain can do. Is its learning potential is absolutely huge. And if it can learn physics, it can learn to focus, okay? And if it can learn to, do neuroanatomy, it can learn to sleep. And it's just needing the right technology, which we're going to show you in a minute here, to be able to do that. Okay. Before I get into the illustration, Alex, I need to know where are we on time? I forgot what our time limit is here.
We're good, at least. I mean, whatever you.
Are we good for another 15 minutes?
Easily. Nobody's walked out yet.
They haven't left yet? I thought it was just you and me in the room. Okay.
I'll let you know.
Okay, when it's down to you and me, you let me know. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, we're all hanging in there? Good? Okay. So let's look at a couple different things. We're going to do a live demonstration, okay? And I actually have our nurse for our company with us. She works with all the educational institutions that we work with. So she is going to be hooked up, and we're going to show you an illustration of how the breathing works, and then we're going to show you how the heart works, and we're going to show you a live EEG after that, which is brain mapping and how the brain actually works. We have this equipment that people rent and they use in their homes to actually be able to monitor their brain and their heart and their breathing, and actually work with them to help them focus better, sleep better, and that kind of stuff. And so this is medical grade equipment, and we're going to look at some of it right now. So here's the first part, which is I'm going to have Amy here just breathe. And if I was with you, I was going to hook somebody up tonight and do this exact same thing. And she's going to breathe how the kind of average person breathes, which is about 13, 14 breaths a minute. And we're going to see how her heart responds to that. And so let's go ahead and just watch this for about a minute, and I'll explain a couple things going on. So the yellow line that you see on the screen is her breathing, okay? And if you look up in the right corner, you'll see respiration rate, and she's breathing right around 15 breaths a minute. I've assessed close to 60,000 brains now and bodies, and the average person out there in most of our studies is breathing around 13 to 14 breaths a minute. That's pretty common. If I was going to measure the entire classroom right now, I'd put money that the average is going to be right around 14 breaths a minute. That's typically what it is in the United States. Now, interestingly, in other cultures, done some work in Kenya and some other places, they breathe totally different, which is fascinating. But here in the United States, we tend to breathe really fast, and we have very inconsistent breathing patterns. So if you see the yellow line, that's her breathing. And then the white line is actually she's wearing a monitor for her heart, and we're picking that up. And the white line is showing us what her heart's doing in relation to her breathing. Well, you know, why are we want to look at both of those? And I'll explain that for you. I'll pull this in here. Okay, this is a very interactive studio here. Look at this. Bringing a whiteboard in. This is like big time here, right? You know. So when you take in oxygen, you have your lungs. Okay, can you guys see that? You cannot see that. Let me see. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, so you got these lungs, and they're taking in oxygen, and inside the lungs are all these little hair-like structures. Okay, and these hair-like structures, they suck in the oxygen, and then they distribute the oxygen out into your blood system. Okay, and then your heart decides from how much oxygen is coming in and how it's getting distributed, how hard it needs to work. Okay, so the way I'm bringing in the oxygen dramatically impacts how the cardiovascular system is working. The more precise the oxygen intake is, the easier it is on the heart, and the more the heart can go into more of a relaxed state where it can be in the zone and very efficient. Okay, so Amy breathing here, you can see that her breathing's kind of going one way and her heart's going another. She's breathing 13.5 breaths a minute. Her sympathetic response, remember we talked about all of these organs can go fast or slow. Her sympathetic response is at a 20%. I want this to be less than 5%, okay? Her parasympathetic response is At 18%, I want this to be less than 5%. So what's happening is because she's breathing shallow and fast, her heart doesn't know what to do with that intake. And you can see how inconsistent the breathing is. And that's the way most of us breathe, very inconsistently. So the heart stays in this sense of anticipatory stress where it's working too hard and too fast. And in Amy's case, it's working, 3 to 4 times faster than it needs to, all based on, not because there's a lion in the room, but because of how she's taking in the oxygen. And she needs to take it in deeper and more rhythmically, and the heart will respond differently, which we're going to see in a second. But before doing that, I want us to work on an exercise with breathing that we're going to have Amy do, okay? So 1 second. And so what we're going to do is I want you to take your free hand and I want you to put it on your stomach, okay? And I first want us to work with pushing our stomach out, our muscle. Don't even think about breathing. Just push your stomach out, hold it, and then pull it back in nice and slow, okay? So take your stomach, put your free hand on your stomach, push it out slowly, hold it, and then back into your spine. Let's do 2 more of those, okay, everybody? I can't see you, but Alex is watching, okay? So let's make sure they're all pushing out, hold for a second, and then back in nice and slow. Here we go. Out, slowly, hold, back in nice and slow, okay? So we got that movement, and what that's gonna do is that movement of the stomach out is gonna allow the lungs to open up to full capacity so that the oxygen can interface with the alveoli, and then the heart can get more oxygen per breath and not have to work as hard, okay? So now let's, with that movement, let's start to breathe in a healthier way. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, as I inhale, I'll be pushing my stomach out. So here we go. Inhale, hold, exhale. Pull the stomach in. Inhale, make the stomach go out like a balloon. Hold, exhale. Inhale. Hold it for a second. Exhale. Okay, structurally that feels different. If you find that your chest is moving, you're still trying to breathe up here, and we want to breathe more down in here. Okay, make sense? So we're going to take a kind of mental image of what you see on the screen right now. See, the white is the heart, the yellow is the breathing, okay? And see how they're not working together, and we're breathing fast, how most people breathe 13.5. Amy's going to change her breathing. While she does that, I want you to use this little pacer, if you can see this up in the right, and follow this ball. When the ball goes up, I want your stomach to go out, and then hold, and then when the ball comes down, I want you to exhale, okay? So here we go. Let's go ahead and try that, and let's see if some different things happen with Amy's heart when we do that, okay? So here we go, nice and relaxed. I want you to do the same thing with her, okay? And there we go. So you see how the shape of her breath is changing, okay? And now she's inhaling, okay? And then she's gonna exhale. First thing I noticed right out of the chute is her respiration rate has gone from 13 breaths a minute to 6 breaths a minute. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And look how symmetrical the breathing is. So she's changing her breathing in such a way that instead of this kind of inconsistent pattern, we're getting this very fluid rhythmic pattern, okay? And I want you guys to just keep breathing along, okay? We're gonna go for about a minute here, and I want you to just breathe along with her, okay? You can either follow her or you can follow the pacer. She typically doesn't need the pacer, so it might be slightly different than the pacer. So you can use either one. I'd recommend that you kind of breathe with her, but hand on the stomach and just kind of follow that pattern in and out, okay? Just follow the pattern in and out. We're going to go for about another 40 seconds or so. It's nice and slow. 6 breaths a minute. Change the oxygen flow. You remember 90% of the brain's energy comes from oxygen. Okay? So we're going to let this go for a little bit more. Okay? I think you're starting to see something change in her heart. Okay? Hopefully you can see on the screen that she did something consciously, which she changed her breathing rate, and then the beat or the rhythm of her heart started to change dramatically. You see now the upbeats and the downbeats of the heart are getting in rhythm with the breathing. So they're becoming synchronized, okay? And in the body, this is creating what's called a resonant frequency, meaning the two things are coming together and it's making the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system extremely strong at this point. The number over here, you remember this fast response or the stress response was around a 20? Now she's an 8. If she'd go another 30, 40 seconds, she'd probably be less 5. So she's decreased the stress on her heart almost by 50, 60%, okay? Over here, same, we've got this change in that, and that's very, very, very good for her body. Now, nothing has changed. She's still kind of hooked up. The environment's the same, but she's changing how she's interacting with oxygen. Now, I could have maybe given her a medicine to slow her down, or I could have said, let's change how we're breathing and see what happens to your cardiovascular system and ultimately to her nervous system. If you were to go to these different NBA and NFL teams that I work with, you would find out that before they take the court or the field, is they're sitting down at the same equipment and they're breathing and they're creating this rhythm. Why are they doing that? They're trying to push away all the lions in their mind and they're trying to get their system in the zone. At halftime, same thing, bring it back together. And then at the end of the game, they're doing the same thing to go into a recovery state much quicker. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the brain and then we'll take a few questions, okay? Y'all hopefully tracking with me here. And let's go ahead and look at Amy's brain here, okay? Before doing that, I'm going to use this whiteboard because you'll probably see it a little bit better. So let me do that this way. Okay, so when we talk about the brain, I need to give you a little bit of overview before we look at a brain scan, okay? Before we look at how the electrical activity is working in the brain, is the brain is very mathematical, okay? It works off of frequencies ranging from 0 to 32 hertz. Okay, now it can go faster, but for all intensive purposes, for most of the things that we do, 0 to 32 are the speeds at which our brain goes. So think of a speedometer and how fast a car might go. The brain has these frequencies that go 0 to 32. Now, so you would see what's called a 1 hertz, a 2 hertz, a 3 hertz, 4 hertz, and that would work its way up to 32 hertz, okay? So what is a hertz? For those of you that might not know, a 1 hertz frequency means that the brain cycles 1 sine wave in a second, okay, in 1 second. So if that's what a 1 hertz frequency is, then a 32 hertz frequency in 1 second is doing 32 sine waves. Very, very fast. 1 hertz is very, very slow. All these brain waves come together to create different mental states or different states of physiological and mental functioning. So kind of a basic understanding of this would be 0 to 12 hertz is where all of our slow brain waves reside. Okay, these are our slow, remember, parasympathetic brain waves are here between 0 and 12. 0 to 4 are primarily related to sleep. 4 to 8 are kind of what keep me in check during the day. They're kind of like a brake pedal. Those are called thetas. And then 8 to 12 are called alphas. And that's where I get all my new ideas. So if you want to be a creative, innovative person, you really need to have a lot of volume of 10 to 12 hertz activity. That's when somebody's super creative. You really can't come up with many innovative, disruptive ideas when the brain is going super, super fast. In some cases, that would be like writer's block, or kind of you're thinking too much. There has to be this slowing down that happens in order for the brain to produce these alphas that come up with new ideas. The story is told of Edison, is that he would actually take these naps, these cat naps, where he would sit in his favorite chair with 2 steel ball bearings in his hands and a table beside him with a piece of paper and a pen. And he would drift off to take a nap in the middle of the day. And what would happen when he would take the nap is the steel ball bearings, of course, would fall out of his hand and they'd hit the floor. And what would that do? Is that would wake him up. And when he woke up, he would immediately reach for his paper and pen and he'd write all these ideas down, everything that was in his mind. And what would happen is, a minute would go by, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then all of a sudden the list would get less and less. Well, what he was doing, I don't know if he really knew the physiology behind it, but what he was doing was as he was drifting into sleep, he was passing through alpha. And then when that noise happened, he'd wake back up and come back into awareness, and he'd pass back through alpha. And that is when all those new ideas happen. You might have noticed that, like maybe when you're taking a shower or you're going to sleep or waking up around sleep states, that you produce a ton of alpha, and those are new ideas. Well, there's a real physiological reason, a neurological reason for that. And that's because this is where our new ideas come out of, 10 to 12. 12 to 20 is really where we do the best of our work. The most productive we're going to be is when our brain is primarily dominated by 12 to 20 hertz frequencies. And that's also referred to as the zone, flow state. This is when we just can't miss the putt. When you're getting all the answers on the test, and you're like, man, I just killed that thing. That paper you wrote, it was just flow, flow, flow. It was coming out, right? You're dipping your foot into alpha, getting a new idea, and then you're producing. Alpha, produce, alpha, produce. That's when you're in this unbelievable productive state. That's a zone flow, and it's literally able to be measured in the brain, and it's a certain speed at which the brain goes. Once you get at over 20 hertz, now the brain goes into what's called sympathetic or fast, okay? And you can guess what these are reserved for. These are reserved for the lions, okay? If there's a lion, I need to be able to get my brain to go super fast so I can obsessively think about that and get out of the dangerous situation, okay? But if I do the same kind of thought process with things that I need to kind of get through, I can get bogged down in obsessive, compulsive, perfectionistic thought processes that can lead to emotions and behavioral disruptions. And most of the anxiety-based things that happen, addictions, a variety of other things, come from these fast states dominating the brain. These are called high beta states, high betas. These slow ones are called thetas, okay? The reason I'm saying that is we're going to look at Amy's brain here, and we're going to be looking at her thetas and her high betas. So remember, the thetas are the slow ones, and the high betas are the fast ones. Those are 20 hertz and higher, and these are going to be down in 4 to 8 hertz, slow speeds, okay? So not me, many, many years ago, okay? For the last 4 to 5 decades, people have been calculating these things. And what's been discovered is when the ratio of my theta to the zone activity, the zone brain waves, is right around 2.4. When that ratio is 2.4, the brain is in a perfect state of focus and recovery, okay? If this number gets greater than 2.4 and breaks through the marker of 3, So now I have so much theta in there that the ratio of my thetas to my zone brainwaves is now greater than 3. Now I'm going to have a major attention problem. Really hard to focus. And that's why if you give this person an amphetamine like Adderall or Ritalin or Concerta, it will speed up the brain and drop the thetas. Problem is you don't know exactly where that's going to land, but that sense of focus happens because you've decreased the theta volume. The biomarker for a true attention problem is a theta ratio above 3. The other piece about theta is you don't want too much, but you also don't want too little. We want to be right around 2.4. Once I get below 2 in my thetas, which are like my brake pedals, now my brain isn't going slow enough, and so it's hard for it to recover. And this is typically representative of some type of sleep problem, that the brain's not recovering well. So I could be looking at your brain while you're awake and look at your thetas, and if they're lower than 2, I know something's going on in your sleep cycle. Okay. Lastly on this, before we look at Amy's brain, is the high betas, the fast ones. The high beta ratio is made up of the high betas over top of the zone, and that creates the high beta ratio. And we want that to always be less than 1.4, okay? If it gets greater than 1.4, now the brain's running too fast. And now we're going to be very susceptible to anxiety-based, stress-based problems. And we don't want that to happen. If that gets up in the 2 5s, 3 0s, now we're talking about real panic, generalized anxiety disorder, PTSD, different things like that. So we don't want this to get really, really high, because that means the person's stuck in a fast state. I'll give you kind of a reference point. Well, first I would say, if I was going to take the average of your room right now, the average is going to be right around 1.8. Okay, most of us are walking around with a little bit more high beta than we need. When you see Amy's, you're going to see that it's pretty low, and that's because she's done a lot of training to get it low. That's not because most people are there. But 1.0, it's very rare to see somebody below 1.0, but I want to give you a reference point before we kind of leave this and look at her brain. I've had the opportunity to work with an individual who's been #1 in the world in tennis over 9 times. Okay, that person's high beta is a 0.68. 0.68. Most of us walking around are 1.8, meaning we've got all kinds of little lions that are walking around with us, and it makes our brain go a little bit faster. But this person just doesn't see lions. They're on the center court at Wimbledon to win to win that match right there at Wimbledon. And what happens is they don't see a lion. Their opponent sees lions, but they don't. They see it just like they're on the practice court. I've also had the opportunity to work with #1 in the world in golf. That individual, 0.7. Very interesting. Worked with MVP of the NBA. That person, 0.71. This is a very characteristic thing of people who can be super calm under pressure and very focused. I've also worked with a lot of different executives that have been very, very successful, and those individuals do the same kind of thing. And so one of the things for you as you think about your future success and how you want your brain to work is you want your thetas to be 2.4, and you want these high betas to be less than 1, because that makes you this super creative but super calm under pressure person, so that you can be very, very productive. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll look at Amy's here, and switch it out. Boom. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to show you just a raw EEG and all the electrical current that's going. This is happening in all of your brains too. The distribution of the frequencies are going to be different, but what you're going to see for Amy here is exactly what is happening in your brain every second of the day from your time you were born until the time you die, is that you've got this electrical current going on constantly. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. This tapestry of all these different frequencies that is constantly running. So the top thing you're seeing is a classic medical grade EEG. Okay, that's what you would see at the hospital. But what we've done for you is we've broken it down into all the different individual frequencies, so you can kind of see them. So it's hard to see down here, but this is 1, 2, 3, and down here is like 32. Okay, so these little spikes you're seeing are elevations of different frequencies, and Amy tends to have a lot of them down in the low frequency range. Okay, but this pattern for her is totally unique to her. There's nobody in this classroom that has the same brain map as anybody else. From the beginning of time till the end of time, there'll be nobody with the exact same brain map as you. It's like a fingerprint, right? And it's within this that we want to find out what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses. So let's kind of pause Amy's for a second, and let's look at her distributions, okay? So I look over here at her theta ratio, okay? And she's a 178, okay? Now, I have the opportunity to know that we were just down in Fort Lauderdale yesterday. We live in Michigan, and we had to get up pretty early to catch an early flight out, so we only had about 5-6 hours of sleep last night. And sure enough, I look at Amy's theta, and instead of being a 2.4, it's a 178. So we already kind of knew that behaviorally, but it's very interesting to see neurologically the brain saying, hey, I'm behind, I need to catch up here, because this is how we make energy from resting, and so I need to get good recovery. Last on here is I want to see, well, how much stress is on the brain? And we want these high betas to be less than 1.4, okay? And she is sitting at a 1.32, which is fantastic. Amy hasn't always been a 1.32, but she's been able to train her brain through a feedback loop where we're rewarding her brain when it's doing the right thing, and we're giving it negative input when it's doing the wrong thing, that she's actually been able to change these speeds so that she can be in the zone in more times than not, and not just need a ligand-gated change, but she can do a voltage-gated change to get her brain into the zone. So this is very good at the 1.32.